Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video by yours truly. We're going to be talking about Wuthering Waves, quote unquote, copying Genshin Impact. Yeah, it's a narrative I'm sure we can go ahead and assume is coming from Genshin Cucks, right? Of course. But nonetheless, we got to talk about the nuances of copying versus inspiration and where we draw that line. Okay, if you're gonna sit here and say Power World copied 98% of Pokemon's design, I'm not gonna refute that argument. But if you try and say Power World is Pokemon, that's where I'm gonna step in and say, well, you're an idiot. No, it's not. That's a survival game, and Pokemon is, well, Pokemon. Let's talk about Genshin Impact. First and foremost, do not try and credit Genshin Impact's world formula and design as a Genshin Impact original. If you do this, you're just telling on yourself that you're a 10-year-old kid who doesn't even know about Breath of the Wild. If you go and Google anything in the realms of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild versus Genshin Impact, you'll come to find out that Genshin Impact damn near 98% copied the entirety of the world design of Breath of the Wild. But does that mean that Genshin Impact is Breath of the Wild? No. Why? Because Breath of the Wild is the canvas, and then Hoyoverse decided to put their twist and spice and cook up a different game. That's precisely what's going on with Wuthering Waves. I brought up a developer interview where, well, it's not even an interview. A developer gets on the internet who develops games, who understands it on a very profound level. And he explains how taking inspirations from other games is an overall net positive. And then he explains how we draw the line. Now, I do want to just take a look at the first part because he explains it incredibly well to where I feel like you guys can get a good grasp of this. But before we even get into it, I would just like to point out that Wuthering Waves is not copying Genshin Impact. Now, is it inspired? Could you make the argument that Genshin might be a canvas or part of that canvas? Yes, but Genshin doesn't have an ecosystem where you can summon Pokemon to the battlefield to help you fight. You can't even go around farming summons and echoes. You can't do this in Genshin. Genshin Impact's combat is completely different from Wuthering Waves combat. You don't have an extreme evasion that's readily accessible to everyone else. You don't have a parry mechanic in there, and you damn sure don't have the hacking and slashing that you have in the Kudo game. You do not have the boss fights that you have in Wuthering Waves. They're way more exhilarating, way more freaking challenging, and way more intense. It's like, it's not even close. There's so many variables that just separate the two from being a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, is the way that the story is told, the incredibly boring ass formula of you talk, I talk, the guy who's playing the game is stun locked and can't move, and you just listen to these two yap for 30 minutes straight and you can't do anything about it. Is that derivative from Genshin Impact's formula? Sure, but it's still not a copy. You know why? The dialogue is entirely different. The characters are entirely different. So there's a fine line between inspiration versus copy. But if you take out Breath of the Wild, guess what? There's no Genshin Impact. It literally needed that inspiration to be the game it is today. You take away Persona, there is no Honkai Star Rail. It needed that game. It needed that game to be a canvas to even create what it is today. You dipshits need to understand that inspiration and copy aren't the same thing. And even then, some elements are straight up copied from games. And it's okay as long as the game itself is transformative and delivering you a product that is enjoyable. I want to give one more example on this, and then we'll watch the developer explain to you guys what I'm trying to say, basically. Genshin Impact, bunch of elements that you love about it. But then there's some elements that Genshin Impact just does not have and will not add ever, probably. And you're like, man, I really wish this game had those elements. When another game comes along, takes the canvas of Genshin Impact with the elements that you love, and then adds in the elements you wish that Genshin Impact has, that is a prime example of transforming, taking inspiration from the game that they know people love, but they also are aware of the things it doesn't have, the weaknesses, and they add it into their game. That's transformative. You can't not get mad and say, oh, you copied Genshin Impact, how dare you? Well, nerds, Genshin Impact failed to deliver upon an audience that it could have captured. That's their loss. Now let's watch this developer explain all this stuff that I've been trying to tell you, because he's a little bit better at it than I am, being that this is his field of expertise.
There you go. You got a video game. You worked on all these, right? And all of these are done by different people. Back in the day, maybe a team of like 8 or 10 could put it all together.
He's pretty much explaining to you guys the fundamentals of designing a video game. These are all components of what you would need to design a video game.
Nowadays, if you want to go something big, like, I don't know, God of War Ragnarok, it gets a lot nuttier, right? And so all of these might have different employees working on different parts and things like that.
Yep.
Now, again, let's say it's 1991, and you've made
I was born in 1992. Boomer mentality coming in strong, but damn it, boy, that was a golden age of gamers.
Cool new game for the Super Nintendo called Street Fighter 2.
Here it is, legendary Street Fighter. Man, oh man, I wonder what games copied Street Fighter. Aww.
You made Street Fighter 2. You released the game to the world. People are Hadoukening. It takes the world.
Bro said Hadoukening.
By storm. Good job. You made a video game. That's great, right? Well, the challenge here is like, cool, you've made a video game.
Yep.
What happens next?
Yep.
Well, your game sells millions, and what happens immediately? Everyone goes, I want some of that money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do that too. And they make another fighting game.
Yep.
And for those of you that weren't around in like the 1990s, what happened was you ended up with stuff like this. And this is just an article titled 15 90s Street Fighter 2 ripoffs. Yes, 15.
And in case you went behind here, he's pretty much getting at when Street Fighter came out and sold millions, a bunch of other companies started making games very similar to Street Fighter, obviously inspired from Street Fighter.
More than 15, right? We got some body blows and some power moves and fighting spirit. Clearly inspired by fighting games.
Mm-hmm.
And some of you might be thinking, well, that's terrible. It's actually not. It's okay, right? Being inspired by another game is totally fine. As long as, and this is the important part, when you're making your own game called Power Spirit, you have to do all this work still. You got to pick your engine, do your level art, do your level design, do your characters. You might go, my character's name is Bayou and Jen, and they shoot Badookins. You know, if you're not...
And that would be a reach, I'll be honest. If Wuthering Waves did that, then I'd be like, yeah, that's a bit of a reach.
It might not be the most imaginative, but you still had to kind of do the work yourself.
And what he's hinting at here is that you cannot say Wuthering Waves copied Genshin Impact when they had to design their own worlds with the apocalyptic theme, design their own characters, design their own combat system, pretty much put in all the effort, all for some Genshin cuck to get on the internet and say, you copied Genshin.
And the reason that's okay is because innovation can happen if you're like willing to do it, right? Because something that does matter is all that matters is the end game is good. If the end game is good, that is what consumers care about, right?
Turn this up more.
And there was one clone from this era that, you know, really stood out. Mortal Kombat, right? Like, now, could you debate that it had...
Would you look at that? If there was no Street Fighter, there would be no Mortal Kombat. Now, would you make the argument that Mortal Kombat copied Street Fighter? Absolutely not. Could you make the argument that it got inspired by Street Fighter? Yep. And honestly, if I'm being completely honest here and fair, I would say that's a fair comparison of Wuthering Waves versus Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact could debatably be Street Fighter, and Wuthering Waves could debatably be Mortal Kombat. Completely different combat sequences, dynamics, finishers, characters. Same canvas though. Let's go back to this.
Differences, but it was clearly inspired by Street Fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But they took their own approach. They added their own hook.
Yep.
You know, fatalities and
just like Genshin did with the Breath of the Wild inspiration.
Killing and stuff like that. And it was great. It was great, right? Mortal Kombat is a fun game, inspired a series. It was good. Should we be mad that Mortal Kombat copied Street Fighter?
Absolutely not.
Obviously not. Obviously not, right?
And guys, I'll be honest with you, this is a fantastic video if you're just curious to the perspective of Power World copying Pokemon or just games copying other games versus inspiration and putting in the work. I actually strongly recommend you watch this whole video because this guy did a fantastic job breaking it down. Mortdog He does TFT content, which I'm a big fan of TFT. So if you are, you want to check my boy out. But he goes into great detail for the rest of the video. I watched this whole video through on an Asmongold React, and this was like an incredible video for perspective on this regard and on this matter. But I say this to get these people to realize nobody is copying Genshin Impact at Wuthering Waves. Now, they are taking certain elements of the game that they themselves drew the conclusion of that's a good element. Whether I agree with some of the elements or not, they took some of them for sure. But the game, the art that's put on the canvas, oh, it is absolutely without a shadow of a doubt a Kudo Games art. You go and look at some of those dungeons and like map structures. You go into some of these fights, you'll see that apocalyptic Kudo game design that has nothing to do with Genshin Impact. And I'm gonna say this one more time before we end this video. The world design does not belong to Genshin Impact for credit. It belongs to Breath of the Wild. Let's get that shit straight. All right. So hopefully this gave somewhat of a perspective to some of these freaking kids and adult babies. I don't know, man. It's insane. But Wuthering Waves, man, there's a lot of elements that I forgot to mention. I forgot to mention my damn self. There's more elements. I just forgot them or haven't even got to them yet. It's a different game. Case in point, I'm out.